There's just this place of pain that I didn't feel welcome to reach out to everybody.
Right.
And she's like, I never made you feel unwelcome. And I said, but...
The air within the courthouse was heavy and oppressive, thick with the unspoken tension that clung to the walls like a living thing, as though the very building itself held its breath, waiting for a storm to break. It was the kind of air that smelled of history, of age-old secrets buried beneath layers of polished wood and faded legal documents, an aroma mingling stale coffee with the faint tang of anxiety. The wooden benches creaked under the restless shifting of onlookers, their nervous fidgeting creating a subtle rhythm of unease. Some sat rigidly upright, others hunched forward, elbows on knees, all of them waiting, watching, listening to the muted murmur of whispers that rippled like an undercurrent through the crowded room. The sharp scent of paper and ink mingled with the faint odor of varnish and sweat, creating an atmosphere that was at once suffocating and electric, a warning that something monumental was about to happen. The courthouse itself seemed to groan beneath the weight of expectation, its fluorescent lights buzzing overhead with an almost accusatory glare, casting stark shadows across pale walls and wary faces. At the very front of the room, beneath those harsh lights that stripped every human expression bare, Kody Brown sat stiffly at the defendant's table. His posture was unnaturally rigid, his back straight as though pinned in place by invisible nails, his jaw locked tight in defiance. Golden curls tumbled across his brow, falling into his eyes, but he made no move to brush them aside, his gaze fixed stubbornly on some point ahead of him, unwilling to glance to either side. His hands drummed upon the table, each tap louder and sharper than the last, a rhythm of frustration and rising fury that seemed to herald the tempest about to be unleashed. Across from him, seated with a quiet authority that radiated defiance, was Christine. Her stance was regal in its composure, her shoulders squared, chin lifted, yet her eyes told another, far darker story. In their depths burned a flame of betrayal and rage, the smoldering fire of a woman who had been silenced for too long and now stood ready to claim her voice, her truth, and her justice. She did not need to speak to declare war. Her very presence was a challenge, a promise that she would no longer be dismissed or ignored. To Christine's right, Janelle sat, her fingers adjusting her glasses with a movement that betrayed both nerves and determination. Her lips were pressed tightly together, clamping down on words too volatile to be spoken yet, her jaw tense as though she was physically holding back years of suppressed anger. Beside her, Mary stared ahead blankly, her face a mask devoid of expression, but the whiteness of her knuckles as she gripped the edge of her chair betrayed the storm raging beneath that surface calm. On the other side, slightly behind Kody, Robin dabbed at her eyes with a trembling tissue, her shoulders already quivering as though she could sense the tidal wave of revelations about to come crashing down upon them all. The sudden opening of a door at the back of the courtroom brought a hush that fell like a physical weight upon the room. The judge entered, her robe flowing behind her with an air of finality, her expression unreadable but sharp. The crack of her gavel rang out like a gunshot, slicing through the murmurs, commanding instant silence. "This court is now in session," she declared, her voice firm, resonant, and impossible to ignore. In that moment, every head tilted forward, every eye sharpened with focus. The onlookers leaned in collectively, the barristers poised like coiled springs, and the once unified household of wives sat divided, each woman now an adversary in a battle not just for truth, but for survival. Christine's attorney rose slowly, his presence calm yet commanding, his voice measured and steady but layered with a conviction that sent shivers through the spectators. "Your Honor," he began, "what we bring before you today is not a trivial legal technicality. This case is not merely about financial disputes or the division of property. What we bring before you is proof. Proof of deceit. Proof of fraud. Proof that Mr. Brown," he gestured sharply towards Kody without turning his gaze away from the judge, "misled not only these women but the very foundation upon which this family was built. While proclaiming loyalty and devotion, he concealed a binding legal union, a secret marriage that strikes at the heart of everything these women believed." A gasp swept across the room, sharp and collective, like the inhalation before a scream. Christine's chin rose higher, not in victory but in unyielding strength, while Kody's face flushed crimson, anger radiating from him like heat. He shifted in his seat, discomfort evident, while his lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously at his ear, trying to contain the explosion that seemed inevitable. The attorney paced slowly before the jury, his voice rising with each step, gathering momentum like a storm gathering strength. For years, my client suspected something was amiss. Late-night disappearances, sudden weekend trips with no explanation, half-truths spun so carefully they never quite formed a whole story. This was not mere paranoia, Your Honor. This was a pattern of deception. And now, at long last, the truth has clawed its way to the surface. He paused dramatically, letting the silence stretch taut, then lifted a hand to reveal a folded piece of paper. This, he said, his voice a low rumble of restrained fury, is a marriage certificate. A legal document Mr. Brown has hidden for years. He did not disclose it to his wives, his children, or anyone else. Today that secrecy ends. The room seemed to hold its breath. Eyes craned forward as the paper was passed to the judge, its creased, slightly yellowed surface bearing the undeniable seal of the county clerk's office. Even before the judge's verdict, the weight of that document pressed down upon everyone present. Secrets such as these do not lie dormant quietly. When they surface, they do so explosively, shattering lives and rewriting histories. Kody's lawyer shot to his feet, his voice booming with frantic energy. Your Honor, this is nothing but a clerical mistake. A relic from years past dredged up now for the sole purpose of humiliating my client. There is no secret wife, no hidden marriage. This so-called evidence is irrelevant, a fabrication. He gestured wildly towards the document, but his protestations rang hollow in the charged atmosphere. Even the spectators exchanged skeptical glances, their murmured doubts weaving through the silence. Christine's attorney, however, remained composed. Instead of responding immediately, he turned to Christine, his tone softening. Mrs. Brown, he said gently, could you explain to the court what led you to suspect something was wrong long before this document came to light? Christine inhaled deeply, her shoulders rising as though bearing the weight of decades. Her voice, when it came, was steady but cracked at the edges by pain. I always felt something was off, she began, her eyes fixed not on Kody, but on some distant point only she could see. He would leave on weekends without explanation, come home distant, distracted. At first I told myself it was stress, money troubles, church obligations, family responsibilities. But then one evening I asked him directly where he had been. Her gaze flicked to Kody, sharp as a blade. He looked me in the eye and said, "Don't ask questions you don't want to know the answers to." The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water, sending ripples of shock through the room. Robin's head bowed lower, tears spilling unchecked as she pressed the tissue to her face. Janelle blinked rapidly, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak but could not. Mary remained motionless, her silence louder than any accusation. The judge studied the document with narrowed eyes, her brow furrowing in concentration. At last she spoke, her voice clipped and precise. This license appears legitimate. It is dated, signed, and sealed. Unless compelling evidence is provided to the contrary, it will be admitted as evidence. The gavel struck once, final and unyielding, and the room erupted. Whispers turned to gasps, gasps to murmurs of disbelief and outrage. Robin clutched at Kody's arm, hissing urgently into his ear, while he shook his head violently, his face a mask of fury and despair. Christine sat perfectly still, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her expression unreadable, though her eyes gleamed with the hard, cold triumph of someone who has dragged the truth into the light. Kody's lawyer clamored for time, arguing desperately that the evidence was flawed, a fabrication, but the judge was immovable. "We proceed," she declared. Christine's attorney stepped forward once more, his tone lower now, deliberate, each word carefully measured. "Your Honor, this document does not stand alone. We have a witness who can speak directly to its authenticity. Someone who was present when this license was filed." The effect of his words was immediate and electrifying. Kody's head jerked up, his eyes wide and frantic as they scanned the crowd, seeking the traitor who would testify against him. Robin's lips moved soundlessly in prayer, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Janelle shifted in her seat, her face pale and set, while Christine leaned forward slightly, a faint, cold smile curving her lips. The storm, she knew, was only just beginning. If one secret could remain hidden for so long, how many more lurked beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed? The bailiff's voice rang out, naming the witness. The courtroom throbbed with a restless energy, a living, breathing entity built from whispers, gasps, and the barely contained fury of 100 tangled emotions. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of paper long stored in wooden drawers. mingled with the bitter undertones of burnt coffee and the stale perfume of too many bodies crammed into a space too small for the magnitude of secrets about to spill forth. Outside, the press swarmed like vultures, cameras flashing against the courthouse steps, their lenses hungry for scandal, for the perfect image that would grace the front pages come morning. Inside, the room itself seemed to hum, as though the very walls had grown sentient, aware that what was about to unfold would change lives forever. At the center of it all sat Kody Brown, stiff-backed and seething, a man caged both by the judicial system and the weight of his own deceptions. His jaw worked relentlessly, a muscle ticking like a clock as his hands gripped the edge of the defendant's table, knuckles stark white beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Robin sat beside him, her delicate frame quaking with silent sobs, her tears tracing clean tracks down cheeks streaked with mascara. She clung to his sleeve like a drowning woman grasping driftwood, desperate, terrified, yet still unwilling to let go. Across from them, Mary sat isolated, her shoulders rounded, her gaze cast downward towards her hands folded in her lap. She neither wept nor shouted. Her silence was a thunderclap, louder than Kody's simmering rage, louder than Robin's grief, louder than the collective breath of the spectators who strained to catch every moment. It was the silence of a woman who had seen too much, endured too much, and now hid her truths behind a wall so high that even this trial might not breach it. "Mr. Brown," the judge's voice rang out, firm and sharp as a gavel strike, cutting through the building cacophony like a blade through silk. She fixed Kody with a glare so cold it could freeze a man mid-breath. "One more outburst, and I shall have you removed from this courtroom. Do you understand?" The murmurs stilled, every eye swinging to Kody, awaiting his response. He glared up at her, his nostrils flaring, but he forced the words through clenched teeth, a barely controlled growl. "Yes, Your Honor." The syllables dripped with venom, but he said them all the same, for even he understood the delicate balance of power in this room. Robin's sobbing intensified at his side, her shoulders hitching, while Mary's gaze never shifted, fixed on the steady rhythm of her own breathing as though she were anywhere but here. Hensley, the prosecutor, cleared his throat and turned to Janelle, whose presence on the witness stand radiated calm strength beneath a surface trembling with adrenaline. "Thank you, Mrs. Brown," Hensley said with a respectful nod. No further questions. Kody's attorney, Mr. Wexler, rose from his seat, his face carved into a smirk that was meant to intimidate, but only served to highlight his own arrogance. "Mrs. Brown," he began smoothly, "let's establish one fact. You claim to have seen a document years ago, a marriage license, yet you have no physical evidence. No photographs. No copy saved. Nothing tangible to present to this court. Your entire claim rests on your testimony alone, does it not?" Janelle's spine straightened, her eyes narrowing with defiance. "That's correct," she admitted evenly. "So," Wexler pressed, pacing slowly like a predator circling prey, "you are asking this jury to place their belief in your recollection of a single piece of paper, something that, by your own admission, no longer exists. Isn't that rather precarious?" Janelle's voice cut through the charged air, calm yet devastatingly clear. "I am not asking them to believe my memory," she said. "I am asking them to believe the truth." The words struck like a hammer on iron. A low rumble of approval swept through the spectators, growing louder with each heartbeat. Wexler faltered, his smirk slipping as he realized he had pressed too hard, revealing the weakness of his own argument. "No further questions," he muttered, retreating to his chair with a flicker of unease. The judge inclined her head. "You may stand down, Mrs. Brown." Janelle rose, her body trembling though she held her head high, dignity etched into every line of her face. As she stepped down, she passed Kody without a glance, even as he hissed under his breath, "Traitor." She did not falter, did not break stride, did not so much as twitch in acknowledgement. She sat beside Christine, their shoulders almost touching. Christine, her lips pressed into a thin line, offered a small, fleeting smile of gratitude. Janelle did not return it, but neither did she move away. The judge shuffled her papers briskly. "Mr. Hensley, who is the next witness?" Hensley's tone grew solemn, his expression grave as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, our next witness is not a member of the Brown family. This individual will provide external verification regarding the legitimacy of the marriage certificate in question." A collective inhale rippled through the room. Kody's posture stiffened and Wexler sat bolt upright, his jaw tightening. Robin's swollen, tear-reddened eyes flew wide with terror, as if she already sensed the storm about to break. The court calls County Clerk Elaine Porter to the stand, Hensley declared. The double doors swung open, and a woman in her late 50s strode forward with an air of authority that commanded instant respect. Her gray suit was impeccably pressed, her hair pulled into a severe bun, her features stern yet unshaken. The sharp click of her heels against the marble floor echoed like distant gunshots. In her hands, she carried a slim folder clutched tightly against her chest, as though it contained the weight of truth itself. She raised her right hand, took the oath with crisp precision, and settled into the witness chair. The air grew taut with anticipation, every breath held, every heartbeat counting down to revelation. "Miss Porter," Hensley began, stepping closer, "please state your position for the record." "I am the elected county clerk," she replied, her voice clipped and professional. "I have held this office for 18 years. Do you recognize this document?" Hensley produced a sleeve, carefully covering the top portion as he presented it to her. She slipped on a pair of reading glasses and studied it with meticulous care. A nod, deliberate and unhurried, followed. "Yes," she confirmed. "This is a certified marriage license recorded in our office." The words detonated like dynamite. Gasps erupted, bodies leaning forward as though pulled by invisible strings. "Is it authentic?" Hensley pressed. "Yes," she said firmly. "The seal, the signatures, the layout, it is all genuine." Christine's hands clenched into fists, silent prayers slipping past her lips. Robin buried her face in her hands with a wail of despair. Kody shook his head wildly, his voice breaking into guttural mutters of denial. "No, no, no." "And whose names are on this document?" Hensley asked, his voice low, precise, the calm before a storm. Elaine Porter's eyes skimmed the page before she lifted her gaze to the courtroom. "Kody Brown," she said clearly, and then hesitated, her brow furrowing. "And a woman named Celeste Harper." The name cleaved through the room like a lightning strike. Christine's eyes flew wide, Janelle's jaw dropped, and even Mary, silent for so long, snapped her head up, her face etched with confusion and disbelief. The crowd erupted into frantic murmuring, the name repeated over and over, a poisonous mantra spreading like wildfire. "Celeste Harper? Celeste Harper? Celeste Harper?" Kody slammed his fists onto the table, but his voice was eerily absent, his fury trapped behind clenched teeth and deadened eyes. Robin spun towards him, clutching at his arm with a strangled scream. "You said she was dead. You told me she was nothing." Chaos engulfed the room. Reporters scribbled madly, their pens scratching like frantic insects. Spectators stood, craning their necks, shouting questions into the din. The judge's gavel crashed down again and again, her voice booming, "Order! Order!" But the word was meaningless now. The secret was out. Celeste Harper, Kody Brown's hidden wife. Christine sat frozen, her heart pounding in her ears. Who was Celeste? Where had she been? Why had Kody buried her existence beneath years of lies? The judge finally wrestled the courtroom back under tenuous control. "This court will recess for 15 minutes, she declared. The gavel fell like a death knell. In an instant, the room fractured into a swarm of buzzing chaos. People leapt to their feet, voices rising, speculation flying like sparks in dry brush. Christine turned to Janelle, her voice trembling. "Do you know who she is? Have you ever heard that name?" Janelle shook her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No, never." In a corner, Robin clung to Kody like a woman adrift in a storm. Her whisper sliced through the cacophony. "You said she was gone, Kody. You said she didn't matter. You promised." Kody did not respond. His face was an unreadable mask, his eyes fixed on the floor, his jaw set like stone. Mary, silent until now, muttered almost to herself, "Celeste? I've heard that name before." Christine whipped her head towards her, desperate. "Where? When?" But Mary shook her head swiftly, retreating once more into her fortress of silence. When the gavel sounded again, dragging everyone back to their seats, the room fell into a tense, electric stillness. The judge's voice wavered only slightly as she said, "This court will reconvene. Mr. Hensley, you may proceed." Hensley's next words struck like a thunderbolt. "The prosecution calls Celeste Harper to the stand." A collective gasp swept the room. The double doors creaked open, and there she was. The courtroom sat heavy beneath the glare of cold fluorescent lights, a vast chamber of polished wood and muted whispers, where truth and deception wrestled in silence before a crowd hungry for revelation. Cameras had been banned inside, yet the energy felt like a live broadcast, each breath and shifting glance magnified to unbearable proportions. Christine Brown sat rigid at the plaintiff's table. Her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles had turned pale, her breath slow but uneven as she stared across the room at Kody Brown. He sat with a smile stretched far too wide, a grin so artificial it seemed almost carved onto his face, his posture deceptively relaxed as though the trial were nothing more than a mere inconvenience. But Christine knew that grin well. It was the mask he had always worn whenever cornered, the false charm meant to hide the panic that brewed beneath his skin. Robin, seated beside him, dabbed at her tear-streaked face, her grip clinging to his arm like a lifeline, while Mary sat further back, stoic and silent, her gaze fixed upon the floor, hiding emotions that had long been buried. Janelle, positioned close to Christine, radiated an air of controlled fury, every muscle taut with unspoken words. As the doors opened and Judge Hillman entered, the courtroom fell into a profound hush, the kind of silence that seemed to press down on the very air itself. The bailiff's command for everyone to rise was met with the scraping of chairs and a unified tension that made Christine's heart pound against her ribs. The judge's eyes swept across the room, settling briefly on Kody, who shifted ever so slightly, his smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second. "You may be seated," the judge declared, her voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. Everyone obeyed. The trial resumed, and the defense's attorney, Mr. Wexler, rose smoothly, his manner composed and calculated, his every movement designed to project confidence. "Your Honor," Wexler began, his tone steady, "before we proceed any further, the defense would like to introduce witnesses to counter the sensational claims made by the plaintiff yesterday." Christine's stomach tightened as she exchanged a wary glance with Janelle. She recognized this maneuver for what it was, a counterattack, an attempt to twist the narrative before the truth could fully take root. The heavy courtroom doors swung open once more, and a woman in a sharply tailored black suit strode forward with an air of clinical precision. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached the stand, exuding an aura of authority that immediately captured the jury's attention. She introduced herself as Dr. Valerie Knox, a psychiatrist with years of experience. "Dr. Knox," Wexler said with rehearsed politeness, "are you familiar with a woman by the name of Celeste Harper?" "Yes," Dr. Knox replied firmly. "She was a patient of mine several years ago." Christine's breath caught in her throat. She turned her head slightly to where Celeste sat quietly in the gallery, her face pale, her hands trembling. Robin, in stark contrast, allowed a small, tearful smile to flicker across her lips, a subtle sign of vindication, or perhaps desperation. "And could you please describe Mrs. Harper's state of mind during the time you treated her?" Wexler prompted, stepping back to give the doctor room to speak. The psychiatrist steepled her fingers, her voice calm and measured as she delivered her testimony. Mrs. Harper suffered from a condition known as delusional attachment syndrome. Specifically, she developed obsessive and unhealthy fixations on men with whom she believed she shared romantic relationships. In these cases, she frequently exaggerated or even fabricated details, insisting repeatedly that she was involved in a serious relationship with a married man. When confronted with facts that contradicted her claims, she would become evasive and defensive. In my expert opinion, Mrs. Harper exhibited classic symptoms of delusional fixation. A ripple of gasps swept through the courtroom, murmurs rising like a tide. Christine's heart sank as she watched the jurors exchange uneasy glances. She could almost feel the tide turning against Celeste, the doubt creeping into their expressions. Celeste herself appeared stricken, her lips quivering as she stared at the woman who had just dismantled her credibility with a few carefully chosen words. Hensley, Christine's attorney, shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor! This is character assassination with no direct evidence to support it." But Wexler was ready. "Your Honor, the witness is a qualified medical professional. Her assessment is entirely relevant to the question of Mrs. Harper's reliability." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Overruled. Proceed." Christine's gut twisted painfully. She could feel the jury's attention shifting like a tide turning in a storm, uncertainty clouding their judgment. The air in the room grew heavier, thick with the weight of unspoken verdicts forming too soon. Suddenly, Celeste could take no more. She leapt to her feet, her voice cracking as she cried out, "That's not true! I never lied about Kody. I have proof." The judge's gavel slammed down with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. "Mrs. Harper, you will remain silent unless called to testify again." Celeste's defiance faltered, and she sank back into her seat, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Across the room, Kody reclined in his chair with a look of smug satisfaction, leaning close to whisper something into Robin's ear. Robin forced a fragile smile through her tears, squeezing his hand, but Christine noticed the brief flash of panic buried deep within Robin's eyes, a secret terror she was trying desperately to hide. When the defense finally rested, Hensley rose for cross-examination, his posture sharp and unyielding. He approached Dr. Knox with the precision of a swordsman, his tone cutting. "Doctor," he began, his words laced with subtle challenge, "you've been paid for your testimony today, have you not?" "Yes," she admitted, though her voice wavered ever so slightly. "How much?" The doctor paused, visibly uncomfortable. $10,000. A wave of whispers rolled through the gallery like a gust of wind through dry leaves. Hensley stepped closer, his presence looming. "And who," he asked, each syllable deliberate, "paid you this rather generous sum?" Dr. Knox hesitated. Her silence spoke volumes, hanging heavy in the room. At last she answered in a barely audible voice, "Mr. Brown's legal team." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Gasps, shouts, and cries filled the air as the judge pounded her gavel repeatedly. "Order, there will be order in this court." Christine's chest expanded with a shaky breath. It was only a small victory, but the seed of doubt had been sown, not against Celeste, but against Kody and his carefully crafted facade. When the session finally ended for the day, the hallways outside the courtroom exploded into pandemonium. Reporters swarmed like locusts, shouting questions, thrusting microphones, their cameras flashing as they pursued every scrap of drama. Inside, Christine found Celeste lingering in the corridor, her face streaked with tears, her hands clutching her handbag as though it were armor. Christine approached her gently, lowering her voice. "Celeste," she said urgently, "they're going to tear you apart if you don't fight back. Do you have anything concrete? Documents, photographs, anything that proves what you're saying?" Celeste's trembling fingers fumbled through her bag until they closed around a worn, creased envelope.